All right. So today, January 25th, week 4. So we're still doing the exercise page layout for your web page, continued, right? So by the end of next week, page layout for your web page will be due. Today we're going to talk about understanding links, using lists and list items, which I feel like we've covered a bit, and then creating menus with HTML. One of the things that we didn't get to last week, that again is off of my original script. In other words, you won't find it here in this page layout for your web page lecture size. But what I want to do is, when we got to styling your page divisions, we should have right now have a header, a navigation, a content area, and a footer. So if I go to faculty, Washington, my 2017 folder, we should have something that looks along the lines of this. Now, last week we did put in an extra div tag over here for our sidebar. So eventually we are going to then make our page look along the lines of this, where we have 2 columns here in the content section, where we have our text, where we have our sidebar, where this is going to act as our kind of makeshift for position only sub-navigation area. And then we have a main navigation area up here. So we are going to look at a couple of different properties today. One being the float property, and another one being, we've already discussed the block versus inline elements in the past. In other words, a block level element will go all the way out to the boundary edges. You can apply a width to a block level element if you don't want it to go all the way out. In other words, inherently, it will go all the way out to the edges of your web page, like this black band there in the navigation and the black band down here in the footer. There is one more property, the inline block value. Now, in, again, my lecture right here, I only used, I believe, the float property in here. But as time has gone by, I've shifted to using inline block as well for the navigation. And because I want you to know all about all of the properties involved, in other words, trying to check things off, you know, as much as possible. We're going to do the navigation using inline block, and I'll show you why. And then we are going to do the columns using floats. So one of the things that we did not get to last time was using the image tag. Okay, so whoops. So again, in the World Wide Web, we generally have had 3 types of image file formats: JPEG, GIF, PNG. And in that case, what we need to do is we can implement and put in an image tag into the code, And then let's quiz some people here. If I were to say, what do you call this word right here? This or that or that? The things in red right there. What are those called? Attributes. You're supposed to say it out loud, right? But these are called attributes, and then attributes have values, right? So we are going to use the source attribute, and we are going to put an image into our page. So did everybody, last time I told you to grab a picture of yourself, right? Or, you know, if you use a picture of a cat, I'm really not going to care, right? Or a dog or whatever, whatever you want to do. But what I want to do is I want to start off by using the image tag. And what we are going to do is I'm going to go down to right before or right after my header level 2 in my text element, my div element that has an ID of text. Remember again, IDs are attributes that you can then give names to that JavaScript can find using the document object model. IDs are only once per page, right? You can use classes then multiple times on pages, okay? So let's do this. Let's go and give this an image tag, right? Call out the source attributes. And now we can go in Dreamweaver, we can cheat and we can browse for that, but I'm just going to type it out, images / my, okay, I'm going to cheat, my face, right? And then I am going to use the alt attribute. So again, the source attribute, or let's say it like this. Remember that an image tag does not have an opening and a closing tag, right? Because unlike an element like the H2 element that we see above, there is no text in an image tag, right? So it is not an element that then can is an element that then you use the attributes of said element to grab the content. So the SRC attribute, source attribute, then if I am here, so looking over on the right side here, if I am looking at my index.html file, right, and then I look at the source attributes, images, myface.png, what it's doing then is this index file is inside this 2017 folder, okay? So this pathway, if you will, right, file path, is then going to look into the images folder for the file myface.png, okay? Can anybody remember, tell me what the alt attribute does? So if I'm writing in here, this is my alternate text, right? So basically what happens then, a few instances where alternate text can get used is by screen readers. Okay, so if somebody with a vision impairment is using a screen reader, right, so accessibility. Accessibility, accessibility, accessibility. So if somebody then with a screen reader is kind of tabbing down the page, right, it'll read aloud, this is my face, right? Or I should say, if we're saying that, this is Mike Sankula's face, right? Okay. So now if we save that, and hopefully I have, let's see if I put those files up to the web yet. I have. Wow, that's pretty big. Is that what I want? No, that's kind of scary. Sorry, guys. I didn't realize that I had uploaded that high res of a picture. So, a couple of things. What I want to do is, let's explore this little lecture here, or this article here, all about floats. If you are on the page layout lecture size, there is a link to that down here, okay? So, but anyhow, it is off of a website, CSS Tricks, which is a pretty popular website. So, float is basically a CSS positioning property, right? So take a look right here in this magazine layout, if you will, right? Has anybody ever used like PageMaker or Quark or InDesign or one of those where then you have a photo and then you have text wrap around a photo? That's essentially what we're doing here, right? So what we want to do is we want to float our picture to the left or to the right. Now, because, however, though my photo at least is so big, what I am going to do is I am going to then give this one more attribute, a class attribute. And let's say I want to call this, well, let's say it like this. Let's go back and take a look at where would I find it? I know where I find it. Let's show you this in action. So if I go to, this is a website that I designed and take care of still to this day. So if we go to this page, aviation, under neuropsychological, etc., we'll see an example of this kind of thing in action right here. So we have this photo floated left, we have this photo floated right, we have this photo floated left, and if I inspect these elements, if you ever get to the point where you are going to be using WordPress, which I really recommend down the line, you will see that there is a class on this image called size medium and align right. Okay. So I'm just going to basically take those two classes and utilize them here in our world, our non-WordPress world. And because what I want to do with that photo is I want to give it a size, but I also want to tell it to float left. So here in this WordPress world, align right is separated from the size medium because you may not want to always have your medium photos floated left or vice versa. You know, if you have something floated left, you may not want to use size medium. So we're just going to separate those. And here then, I am going to say align left. Actually, I'm going to give it a dash. Line left. And here's the good thing about classes, right? With classes, you can also, for an element, you can use multiple classes. So I can say size, medium, and align left, okay? So you can't do that with IDs, though, as far as I know. I've never tried it. Maybe you can, and maybe it'll screw things up. But what I know is in the world of web design and using classes, right? To use a float property to the left, so we are then going to say, let's say, I'm going to actually put this down under content, right? And I'm going to say align left. Let's actually do the width one first because I want to make that smaller to start off with. Width, I am going to say 300 pixels. Why 300? What? The grid that we're using. Yay! You get an A on the quiz today. So if we go back to the 960 grid system here, because I'm then putting 20 on either side, right? You guys just can't see the columns on this projector. That's really, really sad. But anyhow, this 300 marker right there, right, is then the marker that I'm going to be using, right? So if I say width 300 pixels and I save this, and now I go back here and I refresh, right? Because I have not given it a height property as well, it just went and did the ratio automatically, okay? So again, I am going to, I believe it did, yeah, it did the ratio pretty accurately. So now what I want to do is, instead of having it sitting like that above the text, I want it to sit over to the right. And did I say align left or align right? What did I say in my thing? I want it to align right. So sorry about that. So I'm going to use again a class, align right, float right. And I can just, if I ever wanted then to use a class, align left. I'm not going to use it right now, but I could set it up for future use, float left if I wanted to. Okay. So now that I say align right, float right, it is going to now float it right. Okay. Great, but in this case, because I'm a stickler for the grid, right? You can see that the text is coming up all the way to the edge of the photo, which is something that I don't want, right? So what I am going to do then is, on the align right, I am going to, how would I get that text to sit away from that image? Almost, close. Put a margin on the left. I'm going to say 20 pixels because that's my gutter, right? Same thing. If I aligned something left, I would say margin right 20 pixels. Right, so now you can see that it does, now because this text is left aligned, ragged right, it doesn't come all the way out there, but sure enough, believe me, it then will allow it to come out all the way there. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, is it just trial and error when you guess like
Yeah, I mean, it's up to, it's, put it this way. I have sizes that I adhere to given the grid system that I'm using, right? So if you ever look at any of my work, I will have certain sizes for images, 620 pixels, 300 pixels, 140 pixels, because for one, 620 large, that will come out to a full column width of text that you'll see in a moment. Medium, right, that goes over 4 columns like this, and then thumbnail that goes over 2 columns. And then what I do is give the margin left or right according to the grid. So basically my answer is I use settings and pixels. Are you saying why use pixels versus percentages? Is that your question? Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I'm a print designer from way back. So I was very used to the fixed width world from way back. And then as responsive design came around, in other words, what we are going to do in a while, let's say it like this. Down the road, we are going to then do this exercise, make your website responsive, okay? Where when we get to that world, we are going to convert to percentages and M's, okay? So what I'm trying to do here in this class is check off as much bulleted stuff as I can, right? Going through all these exercises. So if we look at this, this graphic right here, we are, and actually this is kind of appropriate that you asked, because in a few minutes what we're going to do is we are going to float our text column left and give it a width of 620, and float our sidebar column right and give it a width of 300. Down the road, when we turn this into responsive, then we have to convert those fixed pixel units to percentages, right? So ultimately in the long run, we're going to use percentages. Okay. So for instance, if you look at the grid up top here that I have as a demo, which you can't see on the projector, but if you're looking at it on your laptop, and then we inspect this, and I go into responsive mode here, I basically start off with fixed pixel units just because that's where I come from, that's the background I have, that's my workflow. You can go mobile first later on down the road if you want. But basically, as we then come down in size, right, if you take a look at the grid up here now, it's now a 3-column grid, right? Again, if you can't see it on the projector, that kind of bums me out, but whatever. But if you see this property over here, grid, columns, width, calc, 33.33% minus 20 pixels, okay? So what I am doing there is basically, I'm dividing the page into thirds minus the 20 pixel gutter, right? So the 20 pixel gutter then will stay fixed. That's just a setting I like. And then all the columns then will be put into percentages. So you can see here, right, where width, 60 pixels, right, gets overwritten as the media queries dictate what breakpoint we're at, which that's what we'll talk about when we get into responsiveness. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. That answers your question. Okay. And again, you know, you'll probably have people, if you tell people like your hardcore developer friends, oh, I'm using the 960 grid, they might say, oh my God, that's so 3 years ago. Why are you still using that? You know, and my answer is, well, it's fundamental. It's a very fundamental look at a grid system to teach you in this class. And I have a habit of using things that don't let me down over the years. So it's a grid system that I've then been able to modify and use to convert it to being responsive, and it still works for me, right? So I don't know, do any of you have helper friends, right? Ask them about the 960 grid system, or ask them, you know, hey, what grid system are you using, right? And they might tell you, oh, we're using the responsive 1200 grid, right? Which is basically the 960 grid with 80 pixel columns instead of 60 pixel columns. And then everything is then put into percentages, right? So let's say if we look at responsive website grid, right? We're kind of taking a tangent, but I feel like it's kind of important to address this. One shout out to this guy right here from Premium Design Works, right? That his SEO, right, for a responsive website grid, he's on page 1. That's me, you guys. So, but if I go to the W3 schools and they talk about grids, remember when I talked about the bootstrap box model, right? Well, what a lot of people then are doing is they are converting to the bootstrap box model. I've converted to the bootstrap box model for images only, right? Just because, again, it's my work, I do things a certain way, whatever. But here, then, what you may find, and this kind of answers, what was your name again? Ritesh? Okay, this might answer your question right here. So let's say you're using a grid system and you're using, oh, look at that. Something that goes over 4 columns. In other words, you have 3 columns. Oh, it's the 12-column grid that people are using. What they may not really realize is it's still based off of, or the 960 grid was one of the fundamental first grids to come out with a 12-column system for a fixed width. And then Bootstrap and other models picked that up and started writing CSS that basically said, 1 column width is 8.33%. Okay, well, if we look then at my site here, and again, you can't see it, but all these grids, let me see if I highlight it like that. Can you see it? Yeah, the column grids up there. Well, at full width like this, if I then inspect this and go back to just, let's see, down to about just under 1024, right? If we look then at this column here, this one list item, again, look at the CSS property right here. Calc, 8.33% minus 20, right? Meaning still keep the gutter at a 20% fixed, right? So what a lot of people are doing that I just haven't really done yet because I've already built a system that I use is they will then put in their CSS all 12 columns like this, so that if instead of using size medium, right, like we did for our photo, if medium is .300 pixels that goes across 4 columns, we would use instead the class column 4, 33.33%. That, I think that really kind of, yeah. So, I mean, it's up to you. I just want to kind of give you the fundamental background of stuff.
So the margin, if you ask like how do you decide what margin? Well, you don't really. So if you're using a framework like like this, you're speccing it out by how many columns it occupies, right? So then you might say the content area, like for Mike, 9 columns. All of the images in the sidebar spans 3 columns. But what he's showing us is like what's beneath all of that.
Yeah, but still, to get the text to sit away from that image, then you still would use a margin. You might use a percentage.
Well, I'm saying when you're using a framework,
Yeah,
it takes care of that for you. But then, so the margin becomes the gutter.
Yeah. So if,
Space between the
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So in other words, if you ever end up using Bootstrap, that's what you are going to start using, because they in the Bootstrap framework in their CSS file, they've set all this stuff up, right? And again, if we just went straight in and said, let's download Bootstrap and start using that, you would feel like, well, wait a second, f-stop and shutter speed, how does that work? Does that make sense? Like, you need to know kind of the foundational stuff. But if and when you get into the 537 class and people are like, let's use Bootstrap. Okay, great. You're going to see columns like that. You're going to see the box size and border box. And you're just going to, instead of having to write this out, size medium, that size medium is going to be called out as that column, and then like this. I know I'm copying and pasting, but I'm just doing it for. So let's say instead I wanted to use that kind of Bootstrap column thing, right? Well, down here, instead of, let's make sure that I'm duplicating it, right? Instead of size medium, I could say column 4, right? Because it would go over 4 columns. Right? Just the thing is now that because their percentages are a little bit different, right? It's off my grid just a touch because there's probably other information in the frameworks that at work. Does that make sense? Right? Oh, I know what it is. It's probably because I don't have the box sizing border box. Let's try that. I don't know, that might be. Let's just improv and take a look here what it might do. So if we say box sizing, border box, which then reverses the box model to take the padding and stuff outside. Oh, there's other stuff at play, right? But yeah, basically, if you use Bootstrap as a framework, you're going to basically, they have all those styles for all the math, right, in there, and you just use them. So basically, you cheat. But, you know, it's a framework. Not like I'm going to go writing my own content management and call it TypePress. You know, I'm going to use WordPress because it exists and it's awesome. Did anybody find that relevant and interesting? Ish? Okay. So going back to this then, if we refresh, right, I have that going over a width of 300. And now what I want to do is, so that's how floats work, right? So if we go back to then, what are floats used for? Well, aside from just wrapping text around an image, floats can be used to create entire web layouts, okay? So if anybody ever remembers, so you might have done this. Did you lay stuff out using tables way a long time ago? Yeah? Okay. That is, the tables were never meant for layout. But at that point in time, CSS had not matured enough to start laying stuff out like this, right? So the more proper methodology, so the downfall of a table as well, when a page loads, let's say there are images inside the table. The browser will read and has to process the whole table before it will even start putting images into the page. Right? So it's a really, I don't know why that mechanism works that way, but that's just how tables render, right? So tables were never meant for layout purposes. They were just something that was just available and used, right? And you would have tables inside of tables inside of tables to get your layout correct. So instead, to do layouts, along came the float properties. So what we are going to do is, just like this screenshot there in the middle, right? We are then going to, instead of float our main content right and float our sidebar left, we are still going to use our, so currently we have in our code that we then gave, put a div tag around our body copy and gave it an ID of text. And then we have a sidebar here, and where we put in a page headline and used an unordered list with kind of some lorem ipsum to kind of FPO for position only, make a sidebar, right? That kind of looks like sub-navigation. And we gave it an ID of sidebar. So in terms of any kind of, let's just go to, actually, let's do this. Let's go back to this where I typed in responsive website grid, right? And then go down to this one right there and click on it. So my SEO is even better, right? Because if you click on search for terms and click on it, it's better, right? So here then in this article, right, you can see, let's see if you can, in the projector, yeah, you can kind of see the columns there in the projector. But if we open that up a bit, then we are still using the 960 grid, right? And this is where I use that background image when I'm basically producing my sites like that. So that's just a trick that I've used for a long time. Works out really well. But we are then going to float our sidebar right and float our content area left. And we also have to give them widths based off of the grid system. Okay, so to start out with then, if we have the ID of text, we don't really have any master call for that ID of text. So let's give it. So first of all, width, 620, right? And then say floats left. Let's then say sidebar width 300 pixels, floats got my semicolon, floats right. Okay. So again, if we were doing this down in the responsive world later on, again, what we are going to do later on is we will convert those widths to percentages, okay? But for now, because we have a fixed width layout, a desktop layout, we're just going to stick with our pixels. And if we do that now, float our text left with a width of 620 and float our sidebar right with a width of 300, and we save that and we go preview it. Uh-oh. What happened? You're like, I don't know. You're the teacher. Why don't you tell us, right? Welcome to the great collapse, ladies and gentlemen. So once we float things, if we then don't want things to wrap around it consistently, we have to say the next element in line clear, okay? So if we can do one of two things. If we go to our footer then, right, because what's happening is, if we go back here, our sidebar is floated left, or excuse me, our content area is floated left, text area. So, our sidebar is floated right, and take a look at the footer, the 2017 up there. Well, what's happening is, because I have one thing floated left, and then another thing floated right, the next element in line tries to wrap around it, just like the text wrapped around that image, right? So basically what we're experiencing then is this. We float our main content left, and our sidebar here, then our up there, okay? So what we can do then is say clear, and I typically, instead of saying clear left or clear right, I typically say clear both, right? So that then, if we refresh this, our footer is down here, right? This is an interesting happening here. I haven't seen the whole screen go black before, right? But let's see, which one is it? Let me take hold on, let me troubleshoot real quick. If I take the color background out of there. Oh, that's what it is. I have that footer container around the footer. And I'm going to get rid of this one because that was just for demo purposes, right? So I am going to get rid of footer container. That's what's happening. And I'm going to get rid of it saying color white. And down here, I'm going to get rid of footer container and push this back over there. Refresh. There we go. So this is what's happening, okay? What happened to, notice my border, right? Around, in other words, if I go back and comment some stuff out real quick to say, let's see, where are the easy comments here? Apply comment. Let's say I take the floats off the text and sidebar, and I go back. remember that we had a border around our content area, okay? But as soon as we float those two elements left and right, our border disappears, right? It's actually still there, but can you see it up under the navigation? Right up there, where it kind of wraps. In other words, if I were to go and just right here inside this content div, right? Because this is a block level element and it is not floated, it will force that border to wrap around it, okay? But because the text area is floated left and the sidebar is floated right, that's what's called the great collapse. So if we go to this all about floats, it doesn't happen in every browser, right? But it happens in certain browsers. And it happens in Chrome on my Mac. Those of you that are using different browsers and different platforms, is it happening to you guys as well in the other browsers? Maybe, maybe not, okay? Well, it will in some browsers. So the way to get around this is somewhat of a hack, right? But there are a few different techniques. We could take, whoops, and I'm just gonna copy this for demo purposes. And just before the end of the content, right, I can put an empty div tag and use an inline style, say clear both. And it'll render itself all the way around again. That to me is a really dumb hack, but it works. Welcome to the world of web development. Why does that happen? I don't know, it just does. Well, why? It just does. Well, why? Quit asking, it just does. That's the way it works, right? We all have those kinds of things, right? Think of if you have an old oven or an old toaster or your car. Well, why does it do this? Well, it just does. Well, why? It just does. Don't ask, right? We can use the pseudo class after, right? Which is a way of putting a piece of content after an element. We'll talk about that when we get to using bullets in our list items a little bit later on. But the method that I typically use when I am doing this is the overflow method, okay? So overflow, you can then use overflow to, let's see what CSS3 School says about that. And CSS overflow. I don't think I've looked this up on here, right? But the overflow methodology will allow you to, yeah, it's not going to really, oh wait, here we go. You can basically, with an overflow, take a look at this. There's lots and lots of text in there, but you can give a height to an element and then say, give it a property of scroll, and it'll take the rest of the content and apply a scroll bar. So you still have an element that's X amount high, but then you can scroll down the rest of the content. this kind of mimics an iframe, if you will, okay? You can say visible, which basically shows you the rest of the text. You can say hidden, which basically does not show you anything past that fixed height mark. Why this works like this is kind of strange, right? But what I'm going to do then, instead of using this clear methodology, on my parent content element, I'm going to say overflow hidden. Refresh, that takes care of the great collapse issue. So what I understand, I think you were actually the one that explained this to me, Thomas. When you do float things, it kind of takes it out of the normal flow of the page, right? The higher or the syntax of code, right? What were you saying? Why don't you explain that the way you explained it to me a long time ago?
Like the sidebar, which one are you trying to? Which element?
The floated elements. If you don't use that overflow hidden, that clear methodology, yeah. Right? Yeah. Like floats, it takes it out of the flow of the document and floats it outside.
Yeah.
Okay, that's still kind of, yeah. Anyway, that's the legal definition, so says Thomas, right? I don't know how to explain it any more than that, but typically what I do is I use that overflow methodology when I'm doing columns like that. Fair enough? Fair enough. Okay. I'm just going to close some tabs here because I got too many of them open. Is the world ending? Oh man, I just closed that one. Page layouts. So that's all about floats. We want this, we want that one. Let's close that one. Building blocks of HTML. All right, going back to this thing. So what we didn't do is in our navigation, we kind of skipped over it and just put a temporary, hey, our menu is going to go here. Okay. So typically the syntax of what we're going to do inside of a menu system then is and I am also going to get rid of the navigation container. Again, that was just for demo purposes to show you that, yes, you can put a div around another div and have it go all the way out, and this layout is still pretty solid. Navigation container. Instead of nav goes here then, the typical syntax or the typical markup that we use when we are doing navigational schemas is the unordered list. So now we need some elements to put into our navigation, right? And let's see what the elements that I used last time were. About services portfolio contact. Why not? Sounds good. I'm going to say about. Services. Portfolio. Whoops, I forgot my website tag. Okay. Now that I do that, I'm going to go back here. What I should have is I should have a set of list items, right? That because list items are block level by nature, they are going to sit one after the other, okay? So again, if we go back to I closed one of my tabs that I should not have closed. Let's see, using list items. We've already really kind of talked about list items. Let's just kind of breeze through this just because it's on the scheduled list.
List items,
Oh, because that's where that black bar at the top was, let's say it this way. When I first started teaching this class, does anybody remember when the HCD website looked like that? No? Okay. So in 2010, 2013, somewhere in there, right? As I was closing out my career here as being a master's student, I was using them, they were using me. In other words, they found out that I had web design experience and I was a web design teacher very early on. They're like, ooh, you can start TAing for the 537 class. So this used to be the labs for the 537 class. And near the end, because I never was able to take the 537 class, because they made me TA it instead, I couldn't take it and TA it. One of the usability inspection methods that I missed out on doing as a class project was card sorting. Okay? So what I pitched them was, hey, let me do an independent study. I have to clean up some of the credits. And because I was teaching, they were like, sure, we'll let you get away with this and get away with that. Don't tell anybody, even if it's on video, right? But does anybody, so then you don't remember what the HCD website looked like before this version, right? Yeah, it was horrible, right? So what I did was the College of Engineering had a theme that they passed off to me, and I cleaned it up a bit on visual design and made some modifications to the UI a little bit. Basically did a cleaner visual design than what they had. And we then made it responsive, and we launched this version of the website. So this visual design version of the website, I don't think I have any other screenshots of it in there. This version of the website then became the catalyst for the exercises in this class, where I used that visual design from the website to say, hey, let's build the same visual design, those specifications, that the departmental website. And then a couple of years ago, I don't know when they did it, all of a sudden, the College of Engineering took their Drupal theme and redid it again to look more like the new brand, because also the colors had changed and that kind of stuff. And so students wanted to know, well, how do you do that? Does that make sense? So what I basically was showing you was this build that I've been using for a long time, this foundational build, still is a solid way you build things that then can be adapted for a more modern look like this, right? So, because students were, well, I felt kind of like, oh shit, man, the students are gonna be like, well, what do you mean? This looks completely different than this old piece of crap, right? And so say, well, all you have to do then is, because these, let's say this content area from here to there is still a width, right? Or a max width, and centered using margin right, margin left auto, right? And if you want a color to then go behind it all the way out, but still have things like this navigation here sit right there at that edge, well, it's still the same principle. All you have to do is throw another extra div around it, give it a color, and let it go out all the way, okay? So so last year when this changed, I believe that what I did was just at that point in time, showed you guys how to do it and then erased it. It was a real long-winded answer to answer that. So what I'm saying now is, you can, if you want to, keep that wrapper around the navigation, around the footer, if you want to keep that color bar going all the way around, right? Again, how you want to modify your visual design that we're doing in this class, once we start implementing a visual design, it's up to you. I'm gonna build, you know, according to the specification of the old website, just because I need to teach you how to build something to, like I said, check off all those bullet points, right? But to just kind of go back to the basics then, I got rid of the footer container div tags and their CSS. So you might want to, it's probably a good idea if you guys delete those, just to, so you are staying consistent with what we're doing in class. Did that make sense to you guys? Yes? Great, okay. So given that then, right, a typical navigational schema is built using list items as markup, right? So again, using list items, right? We have 3 versions of lists. One is the ordered list. By default, we will see numbers. Unordered list, by default, we will see bullets. And lastly, we have something that is called the definition list, where if we have definitions, or this definition list is very useful when you are doing a menu for a restaurant, let's say. In other words, if you have, let's say, a dinner menu, and each item definition was, I don't know, cheeseburger, chicken sandwich, pork sandwich, right? Then the description, so the DT would be cheeseburger, pork sandwich, chicken sandwich, and then the description, the DD, would then be this cheeseburger is a quarter pound, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you would use that list, right? So what we've always done then, and by we, I just mean the design industry, web design, web development industry over the years, is for menu items, we use the unordered list item. And what we can do then is, well, you can see right away that if we leave it default like this, we're going to have these bullets. Okay, we're going to leave those bullets there for a second, right? Just because, I don't know, let's leave them there for a second. But let's talk about then styling menus, okay? So let's say that we have a div ID of navigation. If you want to, you can give the UL tag an ID of navigation items, right? I'm going to do that just because I like giving specific names to specific things. Now, I'm going to not then on the list items actually say navigation item 1, navigation item 2. That's a little bit too far down the rabbit hole to go, but a lot of times on UL tags like this, I will give ID names like that, because if you have, for instance, stuff like this in a sidebar, where your sidebar is that long and you have lots of things that are list items, right? You have a lot of UL tags in there. Well, you may then want to give each UL tag for each set of items its own ID. That's just something I do. Again, you can do it with classes, however you want to, okay? But next, where we're going to go is menu states. So right now, there's a missing element to our navigation item. And that is, notice that we have menu, LI, A. We haven't put our anchor tags in there yet. So if we go to then understanding links. Again, we've already kind of gone over this a bit, but let's sort of revisit the convention that we're going to do. So typically when we have a link, right, we use the anchor tag. And we then have a few different ways or a few different methods, however you want to say it, of linking to different things, okay? One, linking to URLs, or if you take a look at this right there, that is, remember when I said absolute pathway, right? So an absolute pathway means that I am sending it to another HTTP address, right? I am sending it outside of our little relative world, okay? So if I am sending things to internal pages, for instance, if and when, not if, but when we set up our other multi-pages down the line, we are then going to send things to about.html, services.html, to about.php, services.php, so on and so forth, right? So as well, take a look at this right here. So this kind of answers your question from a while back, where, see this hashtag right there? That is when you send something to, so for instance, if I say, go to w3.schools.com, HTML links.html, HTML, hashtag, or # tips, I am then sending this to a named anchor somewhere on the page, right? So we can also use A tags or anchor tags as that kind of methodology. So like when you click on a navigation item and it sends you down the page, right? Let me show you a real old school version of that. So I did this website for the Whispering Music Venue back in 1973, I think. And if we went to get involved, no, where is it? It's the venue, the book, biography, involved. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So take a look at these links here. Okay. So if you can see down here in the URL, down at the bottom, Whispering Music Venue Get Involved.html hashtag major, right? That is where it will then take you right to, whoops, right to this headline right there, that if I inspect that one, this was way back in the table-based days. See how it has an anchor tag name major, right? So now with those parallax scrolling ones, or the websites that you click and it takes you down the page, but it's a little more sexy because it kind of scrolls. Well, all that scroll is a bit of JavaScript to, instead of automatically, bang, take you down. So what we want to do then is we want to put anchor tags around these items. A, right? And then we're going to use the attribute href, right? And right now we can put in a temporary about.html, even though about.html does not exist. And remember that if you then are opening up this anchor tag here, and again, I always forget, I always start going and pointing at the screen, and I forget that if you're watching this on video, you don't know where I'm pointing. So here, if you open this A tag there and start putting in your href attribute, etc., don't forget to close out that beginning or opening tag here, right? Remember, attributes go inside the opening tag. Somebody was having that issue earlier that was sitting with Thomas, I think, right? Same kind of issue. So pay attention to that. That is, in this class specifically, that's one of the errors that I've seen a lot, is somebody opens, or somebody doesn't realize that they have to put that in there, right? Or that somebody opens it up and then doesn't put that closing caret, okay? We are then going to go to the end of the text element, and we are going to close our anchor tag out. So let's do this for the rest of our list items. All right. Now that we do that, and if we then save it and go back to our page, let's take a look at what happens. By default, they turn blue and underlined. Okay? So if we then go back to the good old Google machine, and let's just go back to that query that I made earlier, responsive website grid. Take a look then at Google. we have a bunch of blue links. Okay. Well, Google then is still using, for styling purposes, the default no style blue link with, oh, they got rid of the underline, so they did style it a little bit, right? So you can't go wrong, for accessibility's sake, with the old default style, okay? But let's take a look. I don't know if you can see it on this projector. You kind of can. Let's take a look at the two responsive web design grid, W3 Schools, and the Confer to 960 grid website layout to responsive design. Why are those purple? What? Because you clicked on them. Okay, so those are the quote visited links. All right. So what I'm saying then is when you are creating menus, you have 4 different states. A, link is the state of the default link. A, visited is the state when you have previously viewed that link's page. A, hover is the state of the rollover effect of that link. And lastly, A.active. That is the state of the link when it's actually being clicked, which when you click on a link, it automatically takes you to the page, so you don't actually see the color or whatever when you're actually clicking on it, right? Did anybody ever used to program in Flash way back in the day? Or am I just getting really old? Right? I'm getting old, okay. So in Flash, we used to use those states, and on the active state, did you ever see buttons that would, like, when you're clicking on them, they would like change size or something, and you'd hear a noise, or whatever? That was the active state, okay? I rarely use all 4 of these states. The 2 that I use is just the default A and then A hover, okay? If you want to, if it is important for accessibility reasons, in other words, if you're in a website and you really want to make sure that the people that are using your website know what they have clicked on in pages that they've visited before, you can also use the visited state. If you are going to use these states like that, a link, a visited, a hover, a active, you have to use them in that order or they may or may not work. I haven't done them all in quite some time, but a little while ago, if you took them out of order, they wouldn't work. It was really frustrating, okay? So what we're going to do then is strictly just go in here into our CSS, and because I don't want to do a style for every last state globally, what I'm going to do is I am going to style, in other words, we can style things globally by doing this. A. And what was the headline color that we used earlier? 666, the devil's color. So if we do that, right, we have a link state right here in the body and link states here in the menu, okay? So we can do this. We can set up a default anchor state link like that if we want to. Again, it all depends on how you organize your CSS and what working style you develop over the years. But what I like to do basically is I will go and do things like this. Navigation, ULLIA. Color, Right now, we'll just go and keep the devil's gray. And then let's take the underline off of it. Okay. And what I'm going to do then is say text decoration. Oops, that's not what I want. So now it's still gray, but our text decoration is gone. Let's now give it a hover state.
Why are you doing all of that under the first one?
That's a really good question. And my answer is, well, this is the way I organize my style sheets so I have context. In other words, if I was looking through my style sheet and I didn't, well, let's say it like this. If this was just like that, this means all anchor tags all the way around, okay? If I did this, this means anchor tags only in the navigation. I've run into problems in terms of the cascade when I'm overriding stuff, that if I don't follow a consistent pattern of writing the contextual selectors, I'll run into trouble and things won't work properly. So it may be a little bit more long-winded for me to write out navigation ULLIA, because that's what you're asking. Why am I using all of those selectors? Is that the question?
Yeah, and like why not put color white under the first, under text declaration color?
Under this one?
Yeah.
Because, okay.
Over the color.
So in other words, what we are doing, remember, the property of color is the text color. So we are right now going to overwrite the default color of blue, or what we could be doing here is if we say color white for that anchor tag, we are then overwriting this declaration that we made right here. Okay, so if I say white, now they're white. Okay, so instead what I want is, just for demo purposes, you can style it however you want to. Let's say it like that, right? And when we get to doing the visual design, I'm going to follow the spec for that old site and use those colors. But again, you can use whatever colors that you want to, right? I might even encourage you guys to do that to kind of differentiate yourself and kind of, you know, explore a little bit more. But if I'm then here and I want to say color, and I'll just keep, again, the devil's gray for that. In other words, I could even here not say that because I've already declared that all anchor tags are that color. But here for the hover state, which that's probably, I missed writing hover there. So for the hover state then, I want color, and it helps if you spell right. A long day. Right, color white, background color black. Okay. Yeah, so hold on. So now, as we roll over these, right, they're white with a black background. What's your other question?
Why are you using hashtag instead of block?
Because this is the ID, right? So again, here is where this element is only going to be once on every page. So therefore, I'm still, and again, this is where you'll get people arguing with me. No, you should use classes. I still use IDs because I'm signifying that element on the one page, and that's what it is, right? Okay. So far, so clear? Okay. So instead of, well, let's just say it like this. Oh, I forgot another property. Let's take care of that property. What if we don't want the bullet on the list item? In other words, because we've used list items, it comes with that nice default bullet. What if we don't want that bullet? And right now, by default, bullets go on the outside of the list item. So the list item, remember that our navigation has a padding of 20 pixels right here. So the list item actually starts here, and the bullet is actually outside of the list item. Here's what I mean. If I were to go back here and say, navigation ULLI, border, again, spelling, important. Border 1 pixel solid magenta, because that's just I use magenta to see how things are in space, okay? And so right now, because our list items are blocked by nature, right? And actually, I'm going to keep that on there to show you what's going to happen here in a second, okay? Our list items are blocked by nature. Our A tags are inline by nature, okay? So, and our list items by nature or by inherent or just default properties, however you want to say it, bullets are on the outside. I am then on these list items then going to say list style. None. It's going to remove my bullet. And if I'm, again, if I'm switching back and forth and you're not looking, you want to see my code again, I saw you like, what did you write? Just, dude, slow down. That's what I'm saying. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of that bullet. Now, I could, how am I going to get those items to sit next to each other? In other words, I want them to be horizontal across. How would I get them to sit next to each other? What? Float. Okay, that's one way of doing it. So let's explore the 3 different ways of doing it. 1. I could say float left. The problem with float left, take a look at what happens. Oh, remember that great collapse thing? Oh, yeah. Then we're going to have to do that clear thing, and that's kind of annoying and whatnot. So what's another option? Let's play inline. We want to get them to sit next to each other. Okay. And then our anchor tags, right? But here's the thing. What if we want to give those height or width. So let's try it. I don't know if I've ever actually really tried this. Let's say inline width. I think that the width will work, right? Let's say 200 pixels. Why not? Wrong page. Yeah, I thought it wouldn't work, right? So display inline won't allow you to apply width. Okay, so what if we want these things to sit away from each other a little bit? Well, one way of doing that would be margin right, I don't know, 10 pixels. Save. Notice I got rid of the width. Great, we can set them away from each other a little bit. What if we want them to occupy a little bit more space? Navigation UL, LI, let's say padding 20 pixels. Oh, wow. What happened there? Inline, for some reason, if you put padding around stuff, why is the padding going all the way around up there? And take a look at this. What if we wanted that background color to occupy the same space as the list item, right? Can't do it because it's an inline level element, right? Remember, an inline level element, you can't, like that on a text element, you can't give a width to. So the way to do it, the new way that I've adopted is a property called inline block. And here's why. Eventually, let's do this. Let's go back and delete these for a second, right? And let's go back to these like this. Let's say we've finally made it to the responsive world. And I believe I did it wrong on this one demo way back when. Right, but let's say we're on a phone, right? And we have our navigation open like this. Because eventually we are going to make our navigation sit block again for a mobile phone. So when we click or roll over them, right, this doesn't really do touch like that, right? Let's actually undo that. And let's just make our browser window like this so we can default roll over and click, right? So if we roll over or click on these here, great. But what about if we're right-handed and we want to put our thumb right here? Does that make sense? Okay, so oops. Going back to what we have here, right now we're mimicking that. So the list item, because a list item is inherently blocked by nature, right? And the anchor tags are inline by nature. What if we want somebody to be able to put their thumb or click over there, right? What we would need to do is we would need to convert the anchor tag in the navigation to block, right? So now our anchor tags are block level elements. And so if we are here in this world, look at that. It rolls over. In other words, the anchor tag goes out all the way to the height and width of the list item now. Okay? So then to keep that alive and still have things sitting next to each other, in other words, if I then put on these anchor tags on the list item float left, right? If we have, take a look, again, the Great Collapse, right? Which, if you don't have borders and that kind of stuff, you may not visually see it, but it'll still bite you in the ass one of these days. Something will float up next to something and you'll be like, what's going on, right? So then we could use display inline. Right, instead. Why aren't they sitting next to each other? Because the anchor tags are blocked. So the anchor tag then is saying, oh no, I'm blocked. Screw you. We're going with block. So they fight. So the solution then is a property called inline block. Okay? So now if we go back, they sit next to each other and the hover state comes all the way out. Okay? So if we wanted to then on these list items, let's say we have 4 list items. So I could say width 25%, right? So those now will go out, and instead of saying whatever pixels, I said percentage, but look at that. Why is 25% not working? Huh? What's happening is this is where, when you convert to percentages like that, you're running into the box model, right? Where 25%, because we have padding left and right on the 20%, right, it's taking that out of the math, right? So if I switched it to inline block, right? Or if I wanted to then just say 20%, right? And let's say I wanted to do this. Text align center. So now those center. If I want, in other words, if I said text align center on the LI, what it's doing is the element inside of the list item is going to center, not the list item itself. So if I wanted to then say navigation UL, I believe, right? I may be wrong. Text align center. Those then sit in the center and spread out from the center, okay? And because I've said inline block, then the anchor tag will attempt to go all the way out to the edge of the list item tag, right? So long story short, A few years ago, when I originally started teaching this class, I taught float left, right? But I'd always run into difficulties, right? And it wasn't until after I started teaching this class that I don't know if inline block, how long inline block has been around, but I found inline block and figured out what it did. And since then, I've changed my navigation structure and patterns to using inline block like this. So this is then the navigation patterns, the stylistic properties that I'm using to do navigation these days. Let's just say it like that. So then when it comes to, when we convert this to responsive, all we have to do then is tell the list items to go back to being block, and the anchor tags inside of them are block, thereby us with our thumbs can still click over off the text and still access it. Does that make sense? I don't know, what do you want to talk about for 5 minutes?
Let's go back to.
Oh, I can, sure. Don't be shy about that. What do you want to say?
I don't want to scare it, it's fine with me saying something.
We're done, right? I think we're done. So let me show you this now. Instead of staring at this on the screen, what was your name? Paula, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to open GitHub, and I'm going to show you then what I do. Because my HCDE532 is a repository, it's telling me that I've made a whole shitload of changes in my CSS file and in my file. So now, if I go back to here and say, copy that, and I go to my GitHub, and then I say, for my summary, page layout for your web page, parentheses, part 2, commit and sync. So if somebody else had made changes to this, when I hit commit and sync, it's now pushing to GitHub. And if somebody else had written stuff, it would pull that down to my local as well, right? So now, if you go to, again, the really small icon here, .532, 2017, it now says on index.html, page layout for your web page, part 2. Whoops. Or if you hit index.html, here now on GitHub is everything that we just did. So if you went and to there right now, it would be there for you to see. Okay? But I'll go back here and leave this up on the screen. I'm really finding that, you know, the usefulness of these things. But I don't want to make it. So that's page layout for your web page. I believe we're done. Let me go back to my, I don't think did I forget anything, Thomas? Let's see. Hopefully I didn't.
Sidebar map.
All I did with the sidebar was I shifted it over. Yeah. Look at that. 4 minutes early. Yeah, any questions?
I mean, it's like hard to ask questions, but my image, my image is not the link, it's not linking.
Did you forget to push your image to your server?
But, I'm sorry, I didn't mean my image, my navigation list items, like about services, portfolio, contact.
Oh, they're not links.
They're not linking, so.
Did you put A tags around them?
Let's see.
Oh, wait, yeah, that's the purpose. Also, my image is still.
Yeah, so, let's see, they should, oh, I see. So when you close your A tag, right, it closed before your text element.
Oh.
Put it on the other side of your text element. Syntax. And that's the thing with some of the code editors. When you type out an opening tag, it'll close your tag automatically for you, and you're like, I didn't want you to do that. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yay, look at that. Something easy. So, well, let's go here and go back to here. Say goodbye, everybody. Bye.